A lot of people, when they go through hard times, hard seasons, a lot of times those hard times are so difficult that people break up. But the great thing I can say in our relationship that every tough season we've had, we've been able to overcome together. We've been able to share that burden together and see that on the other side of that tough season was something even greater that we would have missed out on had we not endured and persevered through that season. Just know that that struggle is a great opportunity for you to grow together. Hey there, it's me, Rainie Howard, and welcome to this special episode of The Rainie Howard Show. Every relationship gets to that place where they feel like it's growing apart, or they feel like they're growing as a person, if you're growing as a person, or maybe you can be complacent in a relationship, but there are periods where it feels like, things are different. We're not
Right.
the same,
Some of the excitement is gone and the sparks aren't there anymore.
Yeah, or even someone may become more passionate about something else, like their career. They're more career driven. And so if one person is focused on evolving and growing in their career, and the other person is kind of still just doing what they're doing, it could feel like you're growing apart because you're not always aligned in that direction. But what do you think? Do you think that that's a sign that you're growing apart because one person is doing something and the other person is doing something else, and they may not be as ambitious as the other person?
No, I mean, I think that people can have different passions. I don't think that it's based on one's career directly. You know, like if you have different careers just in general, say counting careers and public servant careers are completely different. Someone can be in a public servant, a police officer, a firefighter, and be really ambitious about their career and still have income caps. Being ambitious in and of itself doesn't necessarily dictate growing apart, or your career, like being driven in your career doesn't dictate that.
But doesn't it feel like it though? Can it kind of feel like, oh, something's different? Are we growing apart?
I think it depends. I think it depends on how the person looks at it. I think if I'm focused on my career and say, depending on what your career is, if you're comfortable doing what you're doing, if you're a teacher and you enjoy teaching, and I'm trying to elevate and grow and go to a different level, I can't say, oh, because I'm doing this, why you not trying to do something else? Or why you're not trying to move on from where you've been at. You know what I'm saying?
I think with me, and I'm thinking about us, I'm thinking about like in the beginning of our marriage. And when I say the beginning, I'm saying like first 4 to 5 years. It feels like it's still the beginning during that time. And I remember there was a time when we still had young kids, like our kids were probably 6, 7, in those age range. And you was working full time. You also started working on your MBA. You was getting your master's degree.
Right.
I remember at the time, I believe I started working as well, doing stuff with the kids. And I remember thinking like, man, he's so busy. Like he's just doing his thing. He got all this stuff when he's not working. He's working on homework, and we kind of just making time fit for each other. And I remember feeling like, oh my God, you're not spending enough time. What's going on? And I remember thinking, I need to get busy. I need to busy myself so I'm not so concerned with what he's doing, and I'm not so frustrated. So I need to get busy. And then I remember applying and getting my master's degree, and during the same time you was getting yours, like a year later. And I think a lot of that, I was motivated, of course, to study business because I was passionate about it at the time as well. But I think another reason was like, I need to do something to fill my free time because he's busy, so I'm gonna be busy,
Right.
and we both was going at it,
Do you think that that was like you felt at some point like, oh, maybe we growing apart because he doing all this stuff? Or was it to more or less say, I need to be doing something too? It's like a motivational piece as
At
opposed to a growing apart type of thing.
back then, I really wasn't thinking the growing apart thing at the time, but I did feel the shift in the relationship. I did feel like there's a difference. You on a different energy wave and you're pursuing some things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was what it was. But after being married for so many years, I think that was like maybe 3 or 4 years ago when I really felt a big shift. I really felt like I wanted change. I wanted change. And I was like, everything in me was screaming, I can't stay in this place, and it started to impact me. And, it impacted me mentally, emotionally, where I just was not happy in my current situation. And I really felt like I wanted to do some things like
So when you say your current situation, what do you mean? What are you
at the
talking about?
time, my current situation, wanting to move. I wanted to move to another city. I felt like I was limited in my environment. I felt like I had these big dreams and I thought moving was the answer. And of course, you did not want to move.
Right.
And I was upset. Not only with that, I was upset. I was dealing with some things personally. I did not like what was going on in my life. I felt like I was gaining weight and I didn't know how to control it. I didn't know how to get to the place I really desired to be in my mind, body, and spirit. And so it was a struggle. It was a battle. And we had been married for many years, over 10 years at the time.
Right.
And so I felt like, are we growing apart? What is going on? What is happening? Because we arguing a lot. And, in that season, I felt like it was argument. And when we got into a disagreement, it wasn't just okay, well, you just don't see eye to eye. It was a real disagreement. It was a real like, I'm upset. And so I felt like, are we growing apart? And that's the thing. Like, and I think you said this in the last episode, just how we're not who we were in the beginning of our marriage.
Right.
So of course you're growing. At the same time, that doesn't mean that your relationship has to fail.
Right. And just being able to stick it through the challenging changes in the season, because sometimes things will be like that where, say, your career is not where you want it to be. Because I kind of look at those situations like that, like, oh, my career is not where I want it to be. Maybe if I relocated, it'll be better. And then my perspective in that is like, we can do that all the time in life. If I feel like my career not right here at this company, maybe I just switch companies. If I think this city not doing me well, I can move to another city and then I can get burned out in that city and feel like, oh, I want to move again. A never-ending process if like that's the reason for making jumps. Not necessarily like I want things in my life and we not working together at it, but like, oh, things not working out right here, but let me just switch. Oh, it's not working out right there, let me just do that.
But at the same time, I think one of the major issues that people are going through in relationships when they're in those times disagreement is the lack of understanding and the lack of listening to the other person. And I think it's so important if you're struggling with your partner or the person you're in the relationship with, if there's a struggle and a disconnect, it's so important that you begin to listen.
And I think that's easier said than done because listening to somebody,
but it's so important.
Yeah, and listening to somebody and doing what they want you to do, and that could be two different things. Because sometimes that can be a frustration. Like it's one thing to listen and hear what somebody has to say, and it's another thing to listen, hear what they have to say, and then start going to go mode. Now I got to do something to fix it, or I got to work something out for them,
So what happens is you start, I understand you looking like, oh, I don't have to be the answer to fix it all and they can figure out. But I think there you can cause a lot of conflict in your relationship when you are just so like you right and you can be right. Because with me, in that time in my life when I wanted to move or I felt like I was frustrated with how things were going and business wise and just feeling like I tried everything. Maybe I just need to move. And you in that headspace, people are dealing with extreme anxiety, depression, they're unhappy, and they may think, okay, maybe this is my opportunity. Maybe this is what I need to do. And so they believe that one thing could be their answer. And so when they have someone like their spouse who's telling them, this is what you need to do. You need to stick it out. You need to deal with it. You need to go. You need to learn from this. And we're not going to just do that. It's kind of like instead of being right and expressing your viewpoint, it's good to sit and listen and get to a place of understanding to work together. Because I did find out I didn't have to move after all. And I could actually heal my mind, body, and spirit in the same environment I was in. But I was just not in the headspace at the time. You know, and we talked about that, how the arguments were triggers for me. And I actually posted something like this on Instagram. Basically, what it said was, if you don't address your inner childhood trauma, your romantic relationship will address it.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was writing my book, You Are Enough. And that book it was therapy for me, but it triggered so much. It actually caused me to go into therapy and need some extra help.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people tell me how much that book has changed their life and healed them. And I'm so grateful for it because it really healed my life as well. But in writing that book, I had to go to a place in my childhood and heal some really painful areas in my life. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but I had opened up some old wounds. Not only was I unhappy with my external situation, we had just sold a house. That deal went really bad. You know, we was living in this small basement apartment at the time, and it was just like, no, we just went from this 2,600 square foot home to this small 2-bedroom basement apartment, dark. I mean, just not my thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we were working on buying another house. It was just so stressful. And I had wrote that book. I was like, what is going on with my life? What is happening? This is not what I expected. And I really dealt with a lot of trauma. Like things that I dealt with as a little kid start coming up, memories. And when me and you will argue, that would trigger even more emotional pain and remembering my mom and dad arguing and I was just dealing with a lot of emotional baggage, and a lot of people go through things like that.
And that would be the challenge for the other person to have to,
And so that's
especially
the
in
thing.
understanding that.
And that's the thing. And that's why I'm sharing this story, because you had no idea that you were triggering me like you were.
Right.
And when you would like say things and we would get in these arguments, I would feel worse and worse. And I'm like, it wasn't until I began to really learn how to heal myself through meditation, through just some deep emotional prayer and all of that, until I got to that place where I can really get my mind back into a healthy place. And we would get into disagreements. I noticed like, oh, that's a trigger. And so I started noticing I need to just not engage in this. And that's when I started learning about not taking things personally and protecting my peace and guarding my heart. Everything all of my readers and listeners hear me talk about, I started really applying that.
Mm-hmm.
And as I did that, you could share your your view of that or your experience in that situation?
It's just kind of like you said, though, when you're in a position where you don't necessarily understand the other person's viewpoint or mind or experience that they may be bringing back up, things that's triggering stuff, you don't know. My thought process in the midst of that specific situation was that I was being there, I was being supportive. I heard what you had to
To
say.
the best that you knew
Yeah,
how.
yeah. Without trying to take extra steps to be like, I'm finna be the savior for all of the feelings that you have, whatever you're going through. Or she want to move, let me just relocate my job real quick and then we can just move without her even being involved. Like taking that part out of it, because I think at that moment in our relationship, I felt like I wasn't trying to do that. I wasn't trying to, like, oh, I feel like this. And now I got to, figure out how to make something happen on your behalf.
In that season, did you feel like we were growing apart?
I felt like growing apart. Specifically, I felt like we had a lot of challenges. We had a lot of issues because there were things that you desired, and there were things that, frankly, I felt were not as big as a concern as they were, as it seemed like. I think from that standpoint, it's more or less like these are big obstacles that we facing right now. It's not that we growing apart, but we in the midst of a challenging moment where your desires don't match what our reality currently is. And if you upset about that, and I wasn't at first, that part is still is a issue, is a challenge.
And things like that cause a lot of people to divorce.
Right.
A lot of people, they're not always divorcing because of infidelity, or what else do they say? People divorce because somebody's cheating, or
lying and abusive,
money issues and things like that, or abusive, right? It was more of the arguing, the disagreement, just back and forth, the emotional pain,
right.
The emotional wounds, and
it's a mixture of like the fact that you have things that you consider that like was baggage or bringing up old things or old traumas and stuff like that. I can say that I was dealing with stuff too, that caused me to be frustrated. If I felt like, well, I know during the time I felt like there was a lack of appreciation, there was a lack of consideration, and just being intensely bothered by that, which caused more arguments, more frustration and anger. That is a part of, like you said, things that we learn to not take things personally, because in essence, I was taking the fact that you had desires that you were working on, that you was having an issue accomplishing, and I took it personal from the standpoint of saying, look at all the stuff that I'm doing. You're not appreciating what's going on. You're not appreciating all that I'm providing.
To a certain extent, you were right, because when you're in that state of mind, when you're going through depression and all you can think about is what's going wrong, you do struggle to appreciate and to be grateful. So, yeah, that's true. I was in that state of mind where I did not appreciate the things that were going right.
And so just from a clarity standpoint on my end, if I was in the place where I understood how you felt more, I could not take it personally like I did. Like even in the midst of that, like knowing the fact that these things are being said, they don't have directly to do with me and what I'm doing per se, but more or less what you want to accomplish, what you're trying to do.
That's really important, but it's not always the other person that's going to understand.
Right.
And I used to have to tell myself, like when you would say things, when we be arguing and you would say certain things that normally would get me upset or make me cry, I remember telling myself, don't take it personally. Don't allow yourself to get there. Don't, because I knew allowing myself to fall back into that toxic, emotionally stressful, painfully state of mind was unhealthy. I had got to a place where I needed to see a psychiatrist, and all of that stuff, even was prescribed medicine. Just being in that place, I knew what it did to me mentally. I knew what it did to me in my health. And so I was determined to be aware of protecting my peace. I was like on guard. So, and at the time, you would be talking to me and be telling me I'm not doing this or whatever, I'm not listening. And I remember like just brushing you off, not even responding, just doing my thing. And you felt like I didn't care. And it wasn't that I didn't care and I was just ignoring you. It was just that was my way. Silencing myself was my way, protecting my peace, eliminating that pattern that we had, because it was a pattern where, you know, somebody say this and the other person say that, and now we're arguing, and
Right.
now we can't stop arguing. And, you know, it was a pattern. So I had to interrupt that pattern with something new, with making a different decision that I could control, because I know I couldn't control you. I knew I could not make you understand and make you listen and all that stuff that we try to do to force the other person. So I had to let go, surrender, and get to a state of peace of mind and just break that pattern.
Right. And then when you think about, when I think about my side of that, experiencing that, you know, oftentimes, and I've witnessed to it, men get the rap of not talking as much, not sharing their feelings, not being open, not communicating. I think at that point, I had heard that for so long, and I was like, okay, now I'm trying to tell you what I'm thinking, and now you working on protecting your peace and don't want to listen. That's kind of how it was. You get in that space where like, oh, now you saying I'm not talking, but now you don't really want to engage. So now what is,
no, once
you
was in that place, because you had therapy and you was working on your communicating and speaking up more, even though I felt like you was speaking up a lot before that, but you was working on some things. I believe when you were in that place, I was more open.
But you know how it is in relationships. We kind of remember the past real easily. Say if we having a conversation today, we could bring up something from 10 years ago and say, oh, I remember this happened 10 years ago.
Right.
Even if things don't even exist that way anymore. So,
Right.
But they linger. They still linger in your mind, and you still think like, oh, well, you used to say I didn't talk. I'm talking a whole lot now. Even if I've been talking a lot for the last few years, it's still like,
Yeah.
you know, in the back of your mind, like, I don't want this thing to come back. I'm trying to address that too, even though the way I'm addressing it is through frustration, and it might be in the midst of frustration and anger and stuff like that. But still, that thing is still present. Like, oh, okay, you can't say I ain't saying nothing now because I'm saying a whole lot.
Yeah. And I think, you know what, when it comes to relationships and even singles, even those of you who aren't in a relationship, I think it's so important for you to work on your communication skills and for you to be aware, listening and understanding. You learn these things in relationships, but you can learn them regardless if you're married or not.
Right.
You can begin to work on yourself and being patient, because a lot of times the stuff that people bring out of you is for you to heal. It's for you to learn the lesson.
Right.
Not for you to just blame them and be upset with them and just, I'm done with you forever. Listen and say, how can I grow from this? Even if I don't, and there were times when he would say things to me, you don't do this, you're not listening or whatever. And I used to disagree with him, of course. And I'm like, okay, whatever, I don't agree. But it was times when I would say, how can I use what he's saying and really take it seriously and really see why he's saying what he's saying? It's some truth to it. It may not be all the way true, but how can I at least listen and open myself up enough to get a better understanding?
Right. And I think that, you know, that's important, especially when it comes to addressing how not to allow yourself to drift apart. in relationships. I think when you go without communication, when you go without trying to understand the person that you're with, and even in the midst of communication, understanding how to have discretion, because it's kind of like being at any job or being with any coworker. There's a level of discretion that you still may have in communicating your thoughts, how you feel, and things like that outside of your home. And it's not like you want to be caged up when you're in your house, but you want to be able to kind of control how you feel a bit better. And that can be done through discretion and communication.
Yes, I agree. Before we finish this discussion and get more into this conversation, I have to share this with you guys. If you have not read our best-selling book, Deciding to Love, sorry to tell you, but you're missing out. This book is amazing, written by both me and Patrick. And it's not just amazing because we're the authors, but because it is all about turning your argumentative, frustrating, painful relationship into an understanding, healthy, happy, loving relationship. I mean, you've probably been through it where, on the outside, it looks like you have this wonderful, happy relationship and people think that it's happy. But then you have those rare moments where you're arguing and it feels like pain. And you may even be wondering, will your relationship last? How long will this go on? Will you make it through? This book is very transparent. We open up, we share our story of being married for over 17 years. We share our ups, our downs. I mean, you hear it all, okay? So if you have not read that book, I want you to go right now to realloveexist.com and get your copy of Deciding to Love. Get it right now. You will not regret that at all. Again, get your copy of Deciding to Love and turn your argumentative, frustrating, painful relationship into an understanding, healthy, happy, loving relationship. And we want to just leave you guys with this because a lot of people, when they go through hard times, hard seasons, pandemics, and all kind of things that hit and things that are sometimes out of your control, a lot of times those hard times are so difficult that people break up. They break apart. They lose friends. They separate. They go through all kind of issues, divorces, and all
Right.
things because they can't handle those tough times. But the great thing I can say in our relationship that every tough season we've had, we've been able to overcome together. We've been able to share that burden together and see that on the other side of that tough season was something even greater
Right.
that we would have missed out on had we not endured and persevered through that season. Just know that that struggle is a great opportunity for you to grow together. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And to recognize that in the midst of that struggle, it also creates an opportunity for you all to grow closer to each other because in essence you all are sharing the burden of life together and you're sharing that moment, which ultimately once you overcome it, you're going to share an even greater moment as a couple, as just a unit, and even individually. Because sometimes I think people in relationships, they're solely connected with the other person that they don't recognize the fact that you'll have an enjoyable moment in and of yourself.
Yeah, because really that's what it's all about. You being a better you is really not so much about, oh, we got to make this relationship work. But once you focus on healing yourself, mind, body, and spirit, you'll be ready for a healthy relationship. But it really starts with you. That's why I say this advice can be for singles. It could be for married couples, because even if you're married, it starts with you. It's not about the other person.
Right. And understand that things don't change just because you get older. The years and the time and the months don't make things better. But it takes an intentional effort saying, I want to be successful. I want to have a successful career. That takes intention. I want to have a successful marriage. That takes intention. And the most successful people look for opportunities to help others. And when you're in a relationship, that's your opportunity to help your spouse if they're dealing with something. And I'm sure you'd have a moment of weakness where you provide that same
you're
opportunity.
Gonna need it. Yeah, that's good. We want to thank you guys for tuning in this episode, and we're going to ask that you will subscribe to our podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and we will connect with you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in for this episode of The Rainie Howard Show. Be sure to sign up to our emailing list at realloveexists.com and rainiehoward.com. We want to hear from you. Send your feedback on today's episode on Facebook and Instagram at Rainie Howard. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to download and subscribe so that you don't miss our next episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you in our next show.